Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When Bertha, the 650-pound hog, vanished without a grunt, farmer Elliot Crane sensed trouble. But nothing could prepare him for the chaos that followed. A trespassing HOA president, a locked garage, and one furious pig with a score to settle. This isn't just a farm story. When you've lived on the same piece of land your whole life, you develop a sixth sense about things. You can smell when a storm's coming a day early. You can tell which goat's limping just from the sound of their steps. And you damn sure notice when 650 pounds of hog named Bertha isn't grunting in the morning like usual. It started like any other Tuesday. The air was thick with early summer heat, and the scent of wild clover drifted in from the western field. I was doing my morning rounds, feed the hens, check the cattle waters, inspect the perimeter fencing. I passed the south garage, gave the lock a tug to make sure it was sealed, then moved on to the animal pens. That's when I noticed the gap in the mud. No Bertha. Her usual wallow, untouched. No snorting, no chewing, no delighted squeals at the sound of breakfast hitting the trough. I scratched my head. Probably wandered out past the gully again. I muttered. That sow had a knack for squeezing through the fence and lumbering down to the shaded brush behind the sheep pasture. She'd done it 3 times this year already. I figured she'd come waddling back by noon like she always did, muddy and unapologetic. But noon came and went, and no Bertha. I didn't have much time to dwell on it. My phone buzzed, and the caller ID read Iowa Central Ag Co-op. I sighed. The board had called an emergency session over a grain delivery dispute. They needed all farm owners physically present in Des Moines. That meant packing my overnight bag, grabbing the binder of reports, and leaving the place under the care of Jake, my young ranch hand. Kid was green, but competent. I gave him the basics: feed schedules, emergency numbers, and a big note on the fridge that said, "Do not touch the garage tools." The 3 garages, really steel-sided sheds, were padlocked. No reason for Jake to go near them. They mostly held machinery, fencing gear, and whatever animal needed temporary separation: injured goats, birthing ewes, or the occasional cranky sow. I figured Bertha had taken a joy hike into the woods. I've got 40 acres, and she'd done it before. What I didn't know, as I backed my truck out of the drive that afternoon, was that someone else had plans for that garage. Someone who didn't understand that country land means country law, that fences weren't just suggestions, that even an old steel shed can hold something with tusks and a mean attitude if you starve her for 3 days. The camera over the front gate caught a glimpse of her later that evening. Karen Trimble, HOA president and walking migraine. She was strolling along my eastern fence line in a pastel windbreaker, clipboard in hand, peering in like she was casing the joint. I didn't think much of it when I checked the footage remotely from my motel that night. Karen was always hovering around the property like a moth near a bug zapper. She'd been obsessed with my old barn for months, claiming it disrupted the aesthetic of the community, as if my hay bales offended her delicate sensibilities. Still, something about the way she lingered near the gate that evening made my neck itch. She paced, took photos, even leaned her head over the top rail like she was trying to hear something, probably sniffing for more violations to jot down in her spiral notebook of doom. I dismissed it, let her write her reports. The county had told her twice already. My land wasn't HOA jurisdiction. I was outside their development. Barely. 7 houses, cul-de-sac, manicured lawns, and then boom, Crane Farm, wild grass, goats with attitude, and 1 missing pig. I went to sleep that night thinking about subsidy negotiations and diesel prices. Had I known Bertha wasn't out on a woodland stroll but locked in that sun-scorched garage, no food, no water, baking in mid-June heat, I wouldn't have slept at all. I didn't know she'd gotten inside. Maybe she'd snuck in when Jake was moving a generator and he didn't see her slip past. The steel door snapped shut, lock clicked into place, and Bertha's fate was sealed, until someone else broke that lock. I'd been in Des Moines for barely 48 hours when my phone lit up with 3 missed calls from Jake, 4 from an unknown number, and 1 cryptic voicemail from the county sheriff that started with, "Mr. Crane, you need to call me back. Now." I was standing in the lobby of the Iowa Farm Bureau building, halfway through a lukewarm vending machine coffee, when I hit play on the recording. What I heard made my stomach flip. "Animal-related incident on your property. 2 individuals injured. Emergency services on scene." I didn't even grab my binder. I walked straight to the parking lot, climbed into my truck, and peeled out of Des Moines like the goddamn place was on fire. 3 hours later, I rolled up the gravel drive of my farm to a sight I never thought I'd see. 3 sheriff's cruisers, a fire truck, and an ambulance parked in my east field. There was yellow tape stretched across the gate like I was some backwoods version of a crime lord. And standing near the barn with a bloodied tissue to her nose and a face twisted like she'd been stung by karma itself was Karen Trimble. I barely had time to put the truck in park before Deputy Miller flagged me down. Young guy, maybe 30, polite, but with that I've seen some weird shit look in his eyes. "Mr. Crane?" "Yeah. What the hell happened?" Miller took off his sunglasses. "Long story short, someone broke into one of your garages, and your pig retaliated. Now, listen, I'm not a violent man. I served in the Army, raised cattle for decades, dealt with all sorts of ornery behavior from both livestock and people. But the mental image of Karen getting her Botox rearranged by an enraged hog damn near made me laugh right there on the spot. Still, I kept my face straight. "Which garage?" He pointed toward the southern shed. The padlock was gone, door half hanging on its hinges, the steel frame dented like something had exploded from the inside. Blood smears led away from it in wide arcs, along with gouges in the dirt in the size of hubcaps. I could see medical gloves, a used EpiPen, and a clipboard lying near the tire ruts of the ambulance. The whole place looked like a battlefield. I followed Miller as he filled me in. 3 HOA members crossed onto your land. No permission, no warrant. They claimed they were conducting an emergency community health inspection because they smelled something foul. One of them, Ms. Trimble, convinced the other 2, Craig Benson and Jeremy Lewis, to check that garage. I frowned. It was locked. Yeah, they brought bolt cutters. Jesus Christ. According to Jeremy, they thought they'd find rotting livestock, maybe a dead animal. Instead, they found Bertha. Miller scratched his neck like he couldn't believe what he was about to say. She came out like a battering ram, hit Karen square in the chest, broke her nose and some ribs. Craig got knocked into a wall, fractured his wrist. Jeremy sprained his ankle trying to run. "And the pig?" I asked, half dreading the answer. "She's fine. Ran off toward the tree line. Took us an hour to coax her back with apple slices." I nodded slowly. A tight, acidic anger was building in my gut. Not just because they broke in, not just because they touched my animals, but because they thought they had the right, that they could come onto my land, cut open a building, and expect nothing to bite back. Metaphorically or literally, Karen was now on a stretcher, surrounded by paramedics. Her face was swollen, makeup streaked with blood, but she still had the audacity to lock eyes with me and hiss, "This is your fault, Crane. You'll pay for this." I didn't respond. Not yet. I needed answers first. I found Jake sitting on an overturned feed bucket near the chicken coop, white as a ghost. "I didn't know she was in there," he said before I could ask. "I thought she was out near the creek. I locked everything up just like you said." I swear I didn't hear a sound. I put a hand on his shoulder. "It's not your fault, kid. She must have snuck in when you weren't looking. You did your job." Back at the gate, I showed Miller the deed to the land. Highlighted parcel lines. Proof that my property had never, not once, been part of Fox Ridge Preserve. I even pulled up footage from my front gate cam, showing all 3 HOA vigilantes climbing over the fence like they were storming Normandy. Miller whistled low. "This is gonna get ugly." He was right, but not the way Karen was hoping. By the time the paramedics loaded Karen into the ambulance, her face looked like someone had inflated it with a bicycle pump and forgotten to stop. One of the EMTs had to hold her arm down because she kept trying to point at me and scream something about domestic terrorism via livestock. I stood quietly near the barn, arms crossed, while Deputy Miller took statements from Jeremy and Craig, both of whom were now sitting on hay bales like they'd just returned from a war zone. Craig had his wrist in a temporary splint and his good hand cradling an ice pack against a forming bruise the size of a grapefruit on his temple. Jeremy's ankle was already ballooning inside his sock. Neither of them seemed particularly eager to talk to me, which, frankly, suited me fine. I was about to head back to the house when I heard it, a car door slamming and the unmistakable click of heels on gravel. I turned and my blood pressure spiked. News vans, 2 of them, local stations. One with a giant KDSM-17 plastered on the side, the other some online outlet with a college-aged reporter hopping out in skinny jeans and way too much enthusiasm for a guy who'd just heard about a hog-related mauling. Before I could so much as curse, the KDSM anchor was jogging toward me, microphone in hand, cameraman trailing behind. "Mr. Crane? Elliot Crane." I clenched my jaw. "Yeah? Is it true that you intentionally left a dangerous animal locked in a garage without food or water? Were you planning for someone to get hurt?" That stopped me cold. I stared at her like she'd grown a second head. "What?" "We spoke to Karen Trimble at the hospital," she continued, already gesturing for the cameraman to get my reaction shot. "She claims that you've been threatening members of the HOA and that this incident was the result of escalating tensions with the community. Do you have a statement?" I stepped forward slowly, calmly, until the mic was almost under my chin. Then I said, "You tell your viewers this. I've been farming this land since I was old enough to lift a feed bucket. My animals are not weapons. And if someone decides to break into a locked structure on private property, they ought to be more worried about the law than the livestock." The reporter blinked. "So you're not denying that the pig was dangerous?" "She's a sow, not a tiger. She was starving and scared, and she was locked in that garage because someone else let her in and didn't bother to check before leaving. If that sounds like a trap to you, maybe you should take a remedial course in logic." They didn't like that answer. Within the hour, headlines were already circulating online. "Farmer's hog sends HOA president to ER, coincidence or calculated attack." "Local landowner weaponizes swine against community leaders." "Attack pig sparks lawsuit rumors in Fox Ridge Preserve." By evening, my voicemail was full. Reporters, curious neighbors. One guy from California offering to buy Bertha's story for a children's book. Another message was from Karen's attorney, already. "Mr. Crane, this is Andrew Lockwell, legal counsel for Ms. Trimble. Effective immediately, we're issuing a notice of intent to file for damages related to criminal negligence, personal injury, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Expect formal service within 48 hours. Criminal negligence, intentional infliction, over a pig. I sat down on the porch, suddenly feeling the weight of it all pressed down on my shoulders like a wet coat. Jake brought me a cold beer, and we watched the sunset in silence. Even the chickens were quiet that night. I could hear Bertha somewhere behind the barn, snorting softly as she rooted around the compost heap like nothing had ever happened. I didn't sleep much. Around 3 in the morning, I turned on the security footage again. I watched, frame by frame, as Karen and her posse snuck through the side gate, bolt cutters in hand, flashlights bobbing. They didn't just come for a health inspection. They were casing my land like it was some condemned property they had jurisdiction over. I watched her gesture toward the south garage, bark something at Craig, then stand back while he forced the door. They didn't even hesitate. She stood right there as Bertha exploded out of the darkness like a hairy freight train. I paused the footage. Karen's face was frozen mid-scream, clipboard flying one way, high heels the other. It would have been hilarious if it hadn't been so damned infuriating. They weren't victims. They were trespassers. I called Linda Mason, my lawyer, and one of the few people who didn't flinch when I said the words countersuit. I left her a detailed message and attached the camera footage. I already knew what her answer would be. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. 2 days. That's how long it took for the smear campaign to go from snide HOA gossip to full-blown social warfare. I dealt with petty nonsense before. Passive-aggressive notes about my inconsistent mowing schedule, complaints about the smell of manure drifting into the cul-de-sac on hot days. But this was something else entirely. On Thursday morning, I found my mailbox open and stuffed with anonymous flyers, each one printed on thick, glossy paper like some warped political ad. In bold red letters, "Is your family safe next to a farm full of dangerous animals?" Beneath it, a grainy, zoomed-in shot of Bertha from God knows where, tusks exaggerated by shadow, eyes reflecting camera flash like she was a hell beast summoned from some porcine underworld. There were bullet points underneath. Documented attack on innocent residents. Faces runoff into our community's waterline. Multiple code violations ignored by county. When will the next incident happen? Each one ended with the same line in block caps. Demand action. Attend the emergency HOA meeting. Saturday 5 p.m. Fox Ridge Library. I crushed the flyer in my fist and scanned the road. No one in sight, but my gate post now had 2 brand new "Stop the Crane Menace" signs zip-tied to it. The audacity. Jake and I spent the next few hours pulling signs off fence posts and digging through my compost bin where someone had dumped half a dozen more flyers, water-warped and stinking. He looked up at me while tearing down a laminated photo of Bertha taped to our propane tank. "Why do they hate pigs so much?" he asked. I had no good answer. Online wasn't any better. A Facebook group had popped up overnight, Protect Fox Ridge Families. It already had over 200 members, many of whom lived nowhere near here. People were posting wild rumors that I was illegally breeding wild boars, that I had a bunker full of livestock weapons, that Bertha was some kind of genetically modified super pig I imported from Eastern Europe. And at the center of it all, Karen, posting photos from her hospital bed, her face a tapestry of bandages and self-righteous fury. She typed with one hand, the other in a sling, but the woman didn't miss a beat. The trauma of being assaulted by a rogue pig can't be overstated. I feared for my life. We cannot allow dangerous elements like this to exist next to our children's bedrooms. The county has failed us. It's time we take back control. The next post was from her lawyer, Andrew Lockwell, a PDF of the civil complaint. 35 pages of pseudo-legal gibberish claiming I had deliberately created a hazardous agricultural zone adjacent to a residential development and listing out damages, medical bills, emotional distress, property devaluation, and the pièce de résistance, a breach of communal safety expectations. I didn't know you could sue someone for violating your expectations. By Friday, the county's zoning board was getting calls. A representative named Dana left me a voicemail. "Mr. Crane, we've received several complaints alleging unsafe livestock conditions and improper waste disposal on your property. While your parcel is zoned agricultural and technically not under HOA authority, we are obligated to respond. Expect an official inspection within the week." I gritted my teeth so hard I heard something crack. They couldn't touch me legally, but if Karen made enough noise, the county would buckle from the pressure. Bureaucrats don't like being in the spotlight, and they sure as hell don't like getting called pig enablers by angry Facebook moms. That night, someone egged my front gate. It was just after midnight. I heard the sound from the upstairs bedroom, splat, 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 followed by a car engine revving and fading into the distance. Jake ran outside with a flashlight and came back swearing. They even wrote "Karma for Karen" on the fence in ketchup. I spent an hour washing the mess off. My land, my animals, my peace, under siege. By Saturday morning, I was ready for the HOA meeting. I didn't wear my work boots or my flannel. I put on my old army dress shirt, tucked and ironed, and brought with me a folder thick with documents, property lines, zoning codes, county emails, and the still image of Karen mid-scream as Bertha launched out of the garage like a meat-powered missile. Jake stayed behind. I told him to keep the shotgun handy, not for people, but just in case someone tried to liberate my animals. Fox Ridge Library was already packed when I got there. A makeshift podium stood at the front, flanked by flags and 2 HOA members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Karen wasn't there in person, but a blown-up photo of her bruised face was taped to the podium like she was a fallen martyr. I stepped in. Conversations hushed. A woman in a white linen dress, one of Karen's close cronies no doubt, pointed at me. "That's him, the pig man." I stood taller. Damn right. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I laid out the facts. My land was agricultural, established in the county registry since 1962. My boundaries were verified. I was not, had never been, and would never be part of Fox Ridge Preserve. The incident with Bertha was the result of trespassing and unlawful entry. I had security footage, I had records, I had witnesses. When I played the clip from my phone, Karen sneaking onto my property, bolt cutters in hand, there was a shift in the room. A few gasps. One guy muttered, "Well, that ain't good." A kid near the back whispered, "Damn, that pig had wheels." The meeting didn't end with apologies, but no one shouted me down either, and as I left, someone clapped. Just once. I never saw who, but it was a start. I woke up Sunday morning with mud on my boots, a citation notice zip-tied to my fence, and a voicemail from my lawyer that started with the phrase, "You're gonna love this." That's how I knew it was time to stop reacting and start firing back. The citation was from the county. improper agricultural waste disposal, unauthorized structural fencing, potential public safety violation. In layman's terms, they were threatening me over a compost heap, a barbed wire line I'd had for 20 years, and a pig who bit someone who broke into her space. I laughed, loud. Then I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a cup of black coffee, and opened the thick red binder I kept in the cabinet over the fridge, the one labeled Property and Legal, Do Not Touch Unless Arrested. Inside were deeds, plats, zoning letters, drone images, and enough notarized paperwork to put a small-town DMV to shame. I'd inherited the habit from my father, who'd once sued a feed distributor over mislabeled protein ratios, and won. He always said, document everything like the devil's your neighbor. In this case, the devil wore mauve pantsuits and wielded community bylaws like they were gospel. I spent the day with Jake going over every inch of the property, taking fresh photos, updating timestamps, and making sure we had backups of every recording. He didn't complain once. In fact, he seemed a little too excited to be part of a counteroffensive. At one point, while photographing the dented garage door, he muttered, "This is better than Call of Duty." That afternoon, I drove into town to meet Linda Mason at her law office, a little red brick building tucked between a diner and a shuttered antiques shop. She looked like the type of woman who carried a concealed revolver and could quote zoning code by heart, which, as it turns out, she could. She was already waiting in her office with the HOA's complaint printed and annotated with so many sticky notes it looked like a porcupine. She didn't greet me with pleasantries, just held up the document and said, "Let's burn them down." Over the next 3 hours, we drafted our response and launched our own lawsuit. Defendant, HOA Fox Ridge Preserve et al. Plaintiff, Elliot Crane. Causes of action included trespassing, entering locked private property with no legal right, property damage, forcibly removing the garage lock, bending the door, damaging tools inside, endangerment of livestock, unlawfully exposing a confined animal to undue stress, dehydration, and possible death, defamation, public accusations of criminal conduct via media, flyers, and social platforms, interference with agricultural operations, disruption of livestock routines and feed cycles due to harassment, false inspections, and unauthorized presence. We attached a copy of the deed and county parcel map, clearly showing I was outside the HOA's jurisdiction, the security footage showing Karen and her buddies scaling my fence and cutting the garage lock, vetted statements from Jake and a local vet who had examined Bertha post-incident, confirming she'd been trapped, dehydrated, and severely stressed. Screenshots of Karen's social media posts accusing me of violence and intentional use of an animal as a weapon. A cease and desist letter addressed to Karen and her attorney, warning of further legal consequences if the campaign of defamation continued. Linda looked at me over her glasses when we were done. "We file this first thing Monday. Let the HOA scream." They just screamed themselves into a courtroom. The following morning, I sat on my porch with Bertha beside me. She'd taken to lounging near the steps ever since I moved a water trough out front and started feeding her leftover watermelon rinds. She was still grumpy, but calmer. She liked being near people, oddly enough, and even let Jake scratch behind her ear without protest. I suppose nearly mauling your enemies does wonders for the nerves. Around noon, the mail came. Inside the bundle was an envelope that made me freeze. Return address, Fox Ridge Preserve HOA Legal Office. Recipient, Board of County Supervisors. Subject, petition to extend HOA jurisdiction to include adjoining agricultural parcels. I opened it. Inside was a formal request, signed and dated, petitioning the county to forcibly annex my land into the HOA's sphere of governance, citing visual pollution, architectural disharmony, and negative psychological impact on the neighboring community. The kicker? It wasn't their first attempt. Linda pulled county records later that day and found 2 previous requests from Fox Ridge Preserve over the past 3 years, both denied by the zoning board. Karen had submitted them under a subcommittee called Fox Ridge Forward, claiming to represent a coalition of residents affected by rural noncompliance. When the county denied the expansions, citing constitutional protections for agricultural zoning and private land rights, Karen never informed her HOA board. She simply carried on as if the expansions had been approved, issuing notices to non-members like me. In short, she'd been playing dictator with a map that no one else recognized as real. It was the crack in the dam we'd been waiting for. By week's end, Linda filed a motion to subpoena internal HOA records, emails, meeting minutes, everything. If we could prove that Karen had knowingly misled her community and abused her position, the fallout wouldn't just be financial. It'd be political, personal. I was ready. I'd been in enough small-town courtrooms to know that drama never stayed in the courtroom. It spilled out into diner chatter, gas station gossip, and morning joggers podcasts faster than you could say objection. But nothing prepared me for the circus that the Crane versus Fox Ridge Preserve HOA hearing turned out to be. The courthouse was a beige building with sticky linoleum floors and humming fluorescent lights that flickered with bureaucratic tension. I wore my cleanest button-down and boots scrubbed free of manure because Linda insisted I look neighborly, but not rural. She herself came dressed like a lawyer you don't interrupt. Dark gray pantsuit, binder in one arm, iced coffee in the other. Her earrings clacked like gavels when she turned her head. The courtroom was packed, not just HOA members and town officials, but folks I'd never seen before, reporters, farmers from nearby counties, even a guy live streaming to what I can only assume was a niche subreddit titled something like Justice for Bertha. Karen didn't show. Instead, her lawyer, Andrew Lockwell, represented both her and the HOA board, who sat in a stiff row behind him like they were being punished at Catholic school. The judge was a man named Ronald Pierce, semi-retired, stern, and not a fan of theatrics. He opened with a deep sigh and said, "Let's keep this civilized, folks. No squealing from either side." The snickering that followed nearly earned half the room a contempt warning. Linda started strong, laying out our timeline like a carpenter framing a house. Security footage, deed maps, HOA correspondence, statements from Jake, the vet, even the feed delivery guy who'd overheard Karen calling me a stubborn menace with warthog grenades. The best moment came when she rolled in a TV monitor, yes, an actual TV on wheels like it was 1994, and hit play on the garage footage. The whole room watched as Karen, Craig, and Jeremy crept through my property, bolt cutters in hand, cut through the lock, and then, boom, Bertha. She burst out of that garage like a four-legged freight train. Karen's scream, captured perfectly by the mic on the camera, sent the room into a stunned silence. The clip paused on a still frame of Karen midair, clipboard spinning, her expression a Picasso of regret. Linda looked at the judge and said simply, "That, Your Honor, is unlawful entry and cause and effect." Lockwell stood to respond, his tie already loose and sweat staining his collar. He attempted to paint Bertha as a known danger and me as an aggressive anti-community actor. He waved around a printout of my Facebook post that read, "If HOA wants a war, they better bring a bigger pig." Okay, maybe that hadn't aged well, but Linda turned it around. Mr. Crane's pig had no history of violence until someone broke into a confined structure and cornered her without warning. If I locked you in a garage for 3 days and kicked open the door, I imagine you'd bite someone too. The room chuckled. Even the judge cracked a smile. Then came the bombshell. Linda submitted a subpoenaed internal email thread from Fox Ridge HOA, obtained just the day before, that revealed Karen had received official denial letters from the county for her annexation proposals in both 2022 and 2023. Not only had she kept this from the HOA board, but she also created fake HOA boundary maps with expanded zones that included my land, then used them to justify her actions. She'd lied to her own board, doctored documents, and led inspections under false pretenses. The courtroom buzzed like a kicked beehive. Lockwell paled visibly. Behind him, 2 HOA members whispered furiously. One stood up and left the courtroom entirely. Judge Pierce leaned forward. So, the plaintiff's entire claim of jurisdiction over Mr. Crane's property is based on a fabricated map and a misrepresentation of zoning records? Linda nodded. "Yes, Your Honor, and we have county officials ready to testify to that effect." Then, the judge said slowly, "We're not talking about a simple trespass case anymore. We're talking about misuse of authority, procedural fraud, and potential criminal liability." Lockwell tried to pivot, throwing Karen under the bus with remarkable speed. Ms. Trimble acted without the board's knowledge. Pierce cut him off. "Save it for the disciplinary hearing. We'll recess now. I'll issue my preliminary findings this afternoon." When we stepped outside, the courthouse steps were surrounded by cameras. Jake was there too, grinning like he'd won the lottery. "Here, that was epic," he said. "You see the look on Lockwell's face? I thought he was going to melt." Linda didn't smile. "Not yet. We've won the argument. Now we need the judgment." But I knew. The tide had turned. The HOA wasn't just losing. They were unraveling. And Karen wasn't just wrong. She was finished. The ruling came faster than anyone expected. By Monday morning, Judge Pierce had issued his preliminary judgment, 62 pages long, precise like a scalpel, and just as merciless. Linda called me at 6:30 a.m., too giddy to wait for business hours. "We got them," she said simply. "It's not just a win, it's a message." The order started with what we'd all been waiting for. Karen Trimble's actions were found to constitute unlawful trespass, criminal misrepresentation, abuse of authority, and incitement of defamation. Her emergency inspection was deemed illegal, her maps fraudulent, and her campaign against me classified as a deliberate and coordinated reputational assault. The HOA board wasn't spared either. While some members claimed ignorance, their failure to verify Karen's actions and their participation in spreading misinformation earned them collective liability. The judge referred to their behavior as willful blindness, masquerading as civic duty. In financial terms, the blow was brutal. $75,000 in damages awarded from the HOA's operating fund, money that was supposed to go to landscaping, snow removal, and a planned community gazebo. $92,000 in personal damages from Karen, which included veterinary fees, legal expenses, security upgrades, and compensation for property damage and emotional duress. A permanent restraining order barring any HOA member from accessing my land or communicating with me outside legal channels. And, for Karen herself, 14 months probation, 300 hours of community service, a suspended sentence for criminal trespass with the threat of actual jail time if she violated any court conditions. The judge's language was blunt. This court has no tolerance for private citizens who believe their personal preference outweighs the rule of law. The ruling hit the news like a cattle prod to a hornet's nest. KDSM led with, Fox Ridge HOA loses landmark case after judge finds power abuse and fabrication by president. Pig 8 ends with massive settlement. Local farmer declared victim of harassment. Karen Trimble's downfall, from real estate queen to HOA cautionary tale. Within 48 hours, I got letters from 3 other landowners thanking me for taking one for the team. Apparently, Karen had been sniffing around their fences too, but the fallout wasn't just legal, it was personal. By the end of the week, 2 HOA board members resigned. 5 homeowners filed a motion to dissolve the HOA entirely, citing loss of trust and financial insolvency. A county review board launched an ethics investigation into Karen's past real estate dealings, especially regarding her manipulation of zoning boundaries and disclosure policies when selling homes near agricultural land. I didn't dance or gloat. I didn't drive past the cul-de-sac blaring a victory song from my truck speakers, though Jake offered. Twice. Instead, I spent that evening walking the property. I checked the perimeter fencing. I repaired the spot near the garage where Karen had entered. I fed Bertha, now healthy, ornery, and twice as smug, and let her graze freely under the open sky. She didn't know what had happened. She didn't care. But I did. I cared deeply that someone like Karen, who had treated the law like an optional suggestion, had been forced to answer for it. The next morning, I received a certified letter, formal notice of HOA dissolution. Fox Ridge Preserve, as an entity, was dead. In its place, a handful of the less hostile neighbors proposed forming a simple neighborhood network, a volunteer-based communication group with no legal authority, no bylaws, and no enforcement power. I agreed to join it. One of the new organizers, a guy named Mitch, who always seemed vaguely embarrassed to live next to a farm, came over with a homemade peach cobbler and a sheepish smile. "We knew Karen was pushy," he said, "but we didn't know she was insane." I nodded. "Now you do." We stood in silence, watching the chickens peck around the old cedar tree. Then he added, "That sign you hung on your fence, it's kinda perfect." The sign in question. Warning, guard pig on duty. Entry without consent will be graded personally. Graded, with an A. A typo I had deliberately left untouched because some things don't need to be fixed. The funny thing about chaos is how fast it disappears when people stop pretending it's their job to manage other people's lives. A month after the verdict, my land was quiet again. Not the dead kind of quiet, just peace. The kind that smells like sweet hay at dawn and sounds like contented grunts from a very satisfied pig. Karen was gone, moved out of Fox Ridge under cover of night, according to Mitch, sold her house for a loss and relocated to a condo 3 towns over. Word had it she was now enrolled in some county-run anger management program that required participants to refrain from community governance for the duration of probation. Probably the first good ruling that office had issued in a decade, Bertha became something of a local legend. At first, it was just neighbors dropping by to see the pig that took down the HOA. Then it was a class trip. Mitch's wife taught 3rd grade and asked if she could bring her students. I built a little viewing area outside Bertha's pen with a sign that read, "Meet Bertha, Defender of Private Property." She soaked it up, grunted happily when kids tossed her apple slices. One boy gave her a plastic sheriff's badge. She ate it. The tours became a weekly thing. I didn't charge admission, just asked folks to bring a bag of feed or a donation to the local 4-H club. I even got a call from a regional news affiliate asking to do a "Where Are They Now" segment. I declined. This wasn't about viral moments anymore. It was about reclaiming what was mine: land, peace, and the right to not be harassed by delusional bureaucrats in yoga pants. Jake stayed on, said he was learning more here than any ag school internship could have taught him. I gave him more responsibility: equipment maintenance, minor livestock treatments, and dealing with tourists who tried to sneak selfies inside the goat pen. One day, he asked if we could start raising sheep. I said yes, but he had to name them himself. The first 2 were Karen and Lawsuit. We still get the occasional letter from angry HOA survivors, folks from other states, venting about their own neighborhood tyrants. I keep a shoebox full of them in the feed room. Someday, I'll turn them into a book. Maybe call it The War on Weeds: Tales from the Edge of the HOA. I made one final change to the property. Near the front gate, just beyond the mailbox where Karen used to leave her threats and flyers, I planted a 10-foot cedar post. On top, I mounted a custom metal sign shaped like a pig in mid-charge. It reads, "Private property, protected by Constitution and swine." Below it hangs a smaller wooden plaque: "Enter without permission and meet Bertha. She's watching." It's not a threat. It's a promise. Because out here, we live by the old codes. You don't steal a man's tools. You don't cut his fences. And you sure as hell don't open his garage unless you're ready to answer to a creature that doesn't care about bylaws, meetings, or aesthetic harmony. You mess with the farm, you get the tusks.